How far can you push someone before they finally stop loving you? I thought making my husband jealous would remind him how lucky he was to have me. Instead, he walked out, and the next time I heard from him, it was through his lawyer. I always thought a little jealousy kept things alive. My name's Dahlia Verne, I'm 31, and I've never liked feeling ignored. Grant, my husband, is steady to a fault. Calm voice, slow movements, predictable as sunrise. People say that's a good thing. They've never lived with silence that long. When I talked, he listened politely, like a therapist, not a partner. When I dressed up, he said I looked nice without even looking away from his laptop. It felt like living beside someone who had already decided he'd seen all of me. I used to tell my friends I wanted fire, not comfort. They said I should count myself lucky, but I couldn't. I wanted him to look at me the way he used to, like I was the only person in the room. Instead, he treated me like another thing on his to-do list. When his friend Ethan came around, loud, funny, always teasing, I noticed how easily people reacted to him. How easily Grant didn't. That's when I got the idea. It wasn't supposed to be cruel. I told myself it was just a spark, something harmless to remind Grant I could still turn heads. A little game. A test. Something to make him see me again. I didn't plan to go too far. I didn't plan for anyone to get hurt. I just wanted to feel chosen, even if I had to push him to make the choice. But Grant never played the way I wanted. He didn't shout, didn't accuse, didn't even ask why. He just went quiet. The kind of quiet that feels final. And now, every time I think back to the moment I smiled at Ethan across the bar, I can't tell if I was trying to wake Grant up or trying to end something I already knew was over. Before we dive deeper into the story, I have one small request. Please subscribe, drop a like, comment, and hit that hype button to boost this channel so more people can discover these incredible stories. It started one Friday night, the kind of night that should have been easy. Grant came home from work later than usual, shoulders tense, hands still carrying that quiet heaviness he always wore after a long week. I'd made dinner, his favorite, which he barely noticed. He said thank you, kissed the top of my head, and went straight to his laptop. I watched him from the table, spoon still in my hand, wondering when I'd stopped being part of his evenings. I told him we should go out, see friends, do something that wasn't just silence and screens. He said he was tired. I said, "You're always tired." He looked up, blinked once, and said, "Work's been a lot." That was it. No warmth, no fight, just stillness. I hated that calm. I wanted emotion, anything that showed I still mattered. I told myself, if he wouldn't look at me willingly, I'd make him look. I texted Ethan, his friend, the easy one, the one who always joked about how boring married life must be. Ethan replied right away, said a few of them were heading to a new bar downtown and we should join. I told Grant about it, smiling like it was spontaneous. He hesitated, then agreed. I told myself that was progress. At the bar, everything was loud and fast, neon lights bouncing off glasses, laughter spilling from every corner. I felt alive in a way I hadn't for months. Grant sat beside me, polite, quiet, nursing his drink. Ethan joined us, clapping Grant on the back, grinning at me like we were co-conspirators in some harmless mischief. When he joked about how Grant was too calm to be human, I laughed, too loudly, too long. Grant just smiled, that small, tight-lipped one that always felt like a wall. So I leaned into the game. I laughed at everything Ethan said, leaned closer when he spoke, brushed my hand against his arm when I reached for my drink. I told myself I was only teasing, that Grant would see what he was losing and maybe, finally, react. I wanted him to get angry, to show something real, but he didn't. He sat there, sipping slowly, expression unreadable. Ethan kept going, unaware or maybe unwilling to stop. He complimented my dress, said I had main character energy, and I made sure Grant heard it. When I looked at my husband, he wasn't looking at me at all, just staring into his glass like it might give him answers. That made me furious. I asked if he was bored. He said, "You seem to be enjoying yourself." I said, "At least someone's paying attention." He nodded once, stood up, and said he was heading home. I told him to lighten up. He said quietly, "Good night, Dahlia." That was all. Ethan laughed awkwardly and said Grant would get over it. I laughed too, but it felt forced now, hollow. The energy in the room shifted, like everyone could sense I'd crossed a line without realizing it. I told myself Grant just needed to cool off, that he'd wake up in the morning, realizing he'd been too serious, too stiff, and we'd laugh about it. When I got home later, he was still awake, sitting at the kitchen table. His wedding ring lay on the table beside his phone. I asked what that was supposed to mean. He said nothing at first, then quietly said, "You wanted my attention, now you have it." I told him he was overreacting, that it had just been fun. He asked if I'd been trying to embarrass him or myself. I said, "I was just being friendly." He said, "You were being cruel." I hated how calm he sounded. I told him if he really loved me, he'd understand it was just a joke, a little jealousy to keep things exciting. He said, "That's not love, that's control." I said he was being dramatic. He just nodded, stood, and went to the spare room without another word. The next morning, the space beside me in bed was cold. I checked my phone, expecting a message, something that meant we'd fight and make up. Instead, I saw a photo from the night before. Someone had tagged me and Ethan, me laughing, hand on his shoulder, Grant blurred in the background, face expressionless. The caption read, "Third wheel energy." I laughed out loud at first, told myself it didn't matter, but when I checked Grant's page, his account was gone, deleted. Our shared photos, anniversaries, holidays, all of it, vanished overnight. I felt a rush of panic, not because I missed him, but because I didn't understand the silence. He didn't block me, didn't message me, didn't even argue. He just erased me. By noon, my mother called. She'd seen the photo. She said, "Men like him are fragile, honey. He'll come around." I told her she was right, but when I hung up, I saw an email notification pop up, financial account updates. It was from our bank, joint savings, access removed. I stared at the screen until it went black. That night, I texted Ethan, asking if Grant had said anything to him. He didn't reply for hours, then finally wrote, "Maybe give him space." I typed back, "He's overreacting." Ethan left it on red. I threw my phone onto the couch and poured a drink. I told myself I was the one being wronged, that Grant was punishing me for wanting attention. But when I went to the bedroom and saw his empty dresser drawers, the neat space where his clothes used to hang, my chest went cold. He hadn't just left the room that night, he'd left the marriage. And somehow I still told myself he'd come back, once he realized what he was losing, once he saw that I could still make him feel something. I didn't understand yet that he already had. It just wasn't the feeling I wanted. I told myself silence was a strategy, that if I stayed calm and didn't chase him, he'd get curious and come back. But 2 days later, he still hadn't called. The apartment was too quiet, too clean. I kept expecting to hear his keys in the door, that familiar sound of him setting down his bag before asking about dinner. Instead, the only sound was the faint hum of the refrigerator and my own thoughts looping over and over. By the third day, people were talking. Someone had posted more photos from the night at the bar, and they were spreading fast, me laughing with Ethan, Grant sitting off to the side looking like he wanted to disappear. The comments came quickly. "She's shameless." "Poor guy." I told myself it didn't matter what strangers thought. But when my sister Tessa sent me a screenshot and wrote, "What were you thinking?" I deleted her message without replying. I needed to take control of the story. I opened my social media and posted a picture of my breakfast, pancakes, flowers, sunlight, captioned, "Sometimes peace means being alone." It was vague enough to sound mysterious. Within minutes, people commented, asking if Grant and I were okay. I ignored them, pretending to be too zen to respond. But inside, I was waiting for one notification, his. It never came. My mother called that afternoon. She said I needed to give him space, then added, or maybe remind him what he's missing. She always thought men were simple, that they'd come running if you looked good enough. I told her I already tried that. She said, then do it again. So I called Ethan. He sounded cautious, almost uncomfortable. I asked if he wanted to grab lunch, said we could talk about how awkward that night had been. He agreed, though his tone wasn't exactly excited. When we met at a cafe, I made sure to choose a table near the window, somewhere public. I wore my nicest dress, styled my hair like I used to when Grant and I first met. Ethan tried to keep the conversation light, talking about work, but I steered it toward Grant. I asked if he'd mentioned me. He said no. I laughed like I didn't care. Then, halfway through lunch, I leaned in and said loudly enough for people nearby to hear, maybe he'll realize what he lost. The next day, a co-worker of Grant's followed me on social media. I took it as a sign the photo had done its job. I imagined Grant seeing it, imagined him feeling that flash of anger or regret. But what I didn't imagine was the message that arrived that evening, an automated email from our bank again. Joint account access permanently transferred to secondary holder, G. Vern. My heart dropped. I called him immediately. He didn't pick up. I called again and again until it went to voicemail. I left a message. This isn't funny. You can't just ignore me. Still nothing. That night, I sat on the couch scrolling through our old messages, rereading every casual text, every be safe and love you. It all felt rehearsed now, like I was reading a script from someone else's life. By the weekend, everyone knew something was wrong. My mother told my father, who called me and said, "You need to fix this before he does." I said, "He's being childish." My father sighed and said, "No, Dahlia, he's being deliberate." I hung up. That night, I decided to go to one of our mutual friends' birthday parties. I told myself I needed to show up looking confident, unbothered, the version of me everyone used to admire. When I arrived, Ethan was there too. He looked surprised to see me but didn't say much. I pretended not to notice how people whispered when I walked in. I laughed loudly, clung to Ethan's arm once or twice, made sure someone got a photo. Grant showed up halfway through the evening. I hadn't expected that. The moment I saw him, my heart jumped. He looked calm, almost detached, like a guest at someone else's event. When our eyes met, I smiled. He didn't. He nodded politely, spoke to a few people, and avoided me the rest of the night. I kept trying to draw his attention, laughing louder, dancing, leaning into Ethan, but it was like he didn't even see me. At one point, I went over and asked if he was really going to ignore me all night. He said, "I'm not ignoring you, I just don't recognize you." I told him he was overreacting again. He said, "You keep calling it that. Maybe that's the problem." Then he turned and walked away. I wanted to shout, to make him stay, but everyone was watching. I smiled instead, pretending it was fine, pretending I was in control. When I got home, I found his wedding ring on the kitchen counter. The same spot where he'd left it before, only now next to a folded piece of paper. Inside was a note in his handwriting. "I don't want to compete with my friends for my own wife. No signature, no anger, just finality." I sat at the table staring at it until morning. My phone buzzed constantly with notifications, tagged photos from the party. One showed me dancing with Ethan, head tilted back, laughing. In the background, Grant was walking toward the exit. The caption read, "Guess he's had enough." The next afternoon, an email from a law firm appeared in my inbox. I opened it expecting a warning, maybe a scare tactic. Instead, it was formal and direct. Notice of financial separation and preliminary divorce filing. My stomach twisted. My mother said he wouldn't go through with it. My father said quietly, "He already has." I told myself it was still a game, that he was bluffing. I'd get him to talk, to argue, to feel. But that night, when I called again and his number went straight to voicemail, the silence finally felt different. Not like waiting, like absence. Permanent, deliberate, earned. I didn't sleep that night. Every few minutes I kept unlocking my phone, expecting a message to appear. Something like, "We need to talk," or "Come home." But there was nothing, just the echo of my own last text. "You're being ridiculous." The next morning, I stared at my reflection in the mirror for a long time, wondering when I'd started looking desperate. My mother told me to stop worrying. She said men like Grant needed to feel in control, that he was punishing me just to see how far I'd chase him. She made it sound like a competition, and I hated that it made sense to me. I wanted to win. So I started thinking about how to shift the narrative. People were already gossiping. The photos from the party had spread fast. Friends texted me, pretending to check in but really fishing for drama. I decided to own the story before someone else did. I posted a photo of myself sitting by the window with a mug of coffee, the caption reading, "Sometimes people forget the woman they fell in love with, until someone else reminds them." Within an hour, it had over 100 comments. Some were supportive, most were not. "So you cheated and are proud of it," one said. Another wrote, "He deserves peace." I deleted the mean ones, left the flattering ones, and told myself that balance meant I was handling it. Tessa called that evening. She didn't waste time. She said, "You're making it worse." I asked what she meant. She said, "You humiliated him publicly, and now you're turning it into a brand." I told her she was being dramatic. She said, "No, you are." Then she hung up. I texted her after, something defensive like, "You'll see when he forgives me," but she didn't reply. Grant still hadn't called. Every day that passed made me more determined to get a reaction out of him. I told myself that silence meant he still cared, that if he were truly done, he'd just disappear. I couldn't accept that maybe he already had. One afternoon, I ran into Ethan downtown. He looked uncomfortable the moment he saw me. I smiled, pretending everything was fine. I asked if he'd heard from Grant. He said he'd seen him briefly, that Grant was sorting things out. I pressed him, asking if he'd said anything about me. Ethan shifted in his seat and said, "He's tired." That word stung more than anger would have. I told him Grant was being dramatic, that he always used silence as punishment. Ethan just nodded, clearly wanting to end the conversation. When I tried to suggest hanging out again, he said, "I think it's better if we give each other space." I laughed like it was funny, but my throat felt tight. That night, I went back to my parents' house. I couldn't stand being in the apartment alone. My mother welcomed me with open arms and poured wine before I even sat down. She said Grant would come around once he realized how much attention I was getting. She made it sound like a strategy. My father just shook his head. "You think this is winning?" he asked. I said I was just surviving. He said, "You're performing." I ignored him. I spent hours scrolling through my photos with Grant, trying to find one that looked loving enough to post, but not desperate. I chose one from a trip we took last summer. Both of us smiling, arms around each other. I wrote a caption underneath, "Love is complicated. Sometimes people forget how to fight for it." I wanted it to sound deep, forgiving. But within minutes, the comments filled with more judgment. "You're not the victim here. He's better off. Stop playing the martyr." I told my mother people were cruel. She said, "They're jealous." My father muttered, "No, they're right." I pretended not to hear him. Later that week, an old mutual friend texted me a photo. It was of Grant walking into a law office. The message under it said, "Look serious." My stomach dropped. I called him again. No answer. I left a voicemail saying we needed to talk, that this had gone too far. that I was ready to fix things. When he didn't respond, I drove to his workshop the next day. He was there, standing beside one of his machines, focused, calm as ever. When he saw me, he didn't even look surprised. I said, "We need to talk." He said, "About what?" I told him we could still work this out, that everyone made mistakes. He said, "You don't think it's a mistake. You think it's a performance." I said, "You're making me look crazy." He said, "You're doing that on your own." I started crying then, saying I only did it because I wanted him to care again. He said softly, "If that's what care looks like to you, you need help." I followed him to his car, begging him not to do this. He said, "It's already done." I asked what that meant. He looked at me for the first time in weeks and said, "I've filed." Then he drove away. When I got home, there was an envelope waiting on the doorstep. Inside was a formal letter from his lawyer confirming the separation filing. I threw it onto the table and told myself he was bluffing. But that night, when Ethan texted me to say he'd been contacted by the same lawyer for a statement, I realized it wasn't a bluff. My mother said I should ignore it, that he'd cool off. My father said, "He's not angry, he's done." I didn't believe him. Not yet. Not until I saw that envelope again, the letterhead so official, so cold, so final, and understood that for the first time in our marriage, Grant wasn't trying to make a point. He was closing a chapter, and I was still standing in the middle of it, pretending it wasn't over. The first meeting with my lawyer didn't feel real. I kept waiting for someone to tell me it was all just a misunderstanding, that Grant was bluffing to scare me. But when she slid a thick folder across her desk, filled with printed screenshots, photos, and statements, my stomach sank. "He's thorough," she said. I flipped through the pages. Pictures of me and Ethan at the bar, comments I'd left online, even the caption from my Coffee and Peace post. My words, printed in black and white, looked worse than I remembered. I said it was harmless, that I'd been emotional, that people were twisting everything. My lawyer didn't argue. She just said, "He's not asking for money. He's asking for distance." That sentence stayed in my head long after I left her office. When I got home, my mother was pacing in the kitchen. She'd already heard from my father. He said Grant was protecting himself, not punishing me. My mother disagreed. "He's punishing her because she embarrassed him," she said. I wanted to believe that. It felt safer to think this was about pride and not consequence. My father just said, "It's about self-respect, something you stopped recognizing." I told them both to stop taking sides. My mother hugged me and said, "He'll come to his senses." My father said quietly, "He already has." That night, I opened my phone and typed out a long message to Grant, part apology, part accusation. I told him I never meant to hurt him, that I just wanted to feel noticed, that I didn't deserve this kind of silence. I ended it with, "Can we please talk like adults?" I watched the screen for half an hour, waiting for the typing bubble. It never appeared. So I did what I always did when I felt ignored. I posted a photo of me sitting on the couch, red eyes, a half-empty glass of wine beside me. The caption read, "Everyone makes mistakes. Some people just don't know how to forgive." It got hundreds of reactions, not the kind I wanted. People called me manipulative, fake, attention-hungry. One comment said, "He forgave you for years. You just didn't notice." By morning, the video had been reshared dozens of times. Some users stitched clips of me laughing at the bar next to screenshots of my tearful post. The contrast was brutal. My lawyer called me that afternoon and said, "You need to stop posting. Every word you write strengthens his case." I told her she was overreacting. She said, "So did he, until now." Later that day, Ethan texted me. They reached out to me. I had to be honest. I called him immediately, but he didn't pick up. I sent message after message. "What did you say? Why would you do this to me?" He finally replied, "I just told them what happened. You made me part of this. I didn't want to lie anymore." I threw my phone onto the couch and cried, furious and humiliated. When my mother came by that evening, she told me to stay strong. She said, "He'll miss you when this all settles down." I wanted to scream. I told her he didn't seem like a man who missed anything. She tried to hug me, but I pulled away. I didn't want comfort. I wanted control. The next morning, a new email arrived from my lawyer. It said that Grant's team had submitted a deposition date. Attached was a copy of their evidence list, dozens of screenshots, witness statements, and, at the bottom, a line that made my blood run cold: recorded communication between parties. I didn't know what that meant until I remembered the voicemail I'd left him weeks earlier. Me shouting, crying, accusing him of being heartless. I texted my mother, "He's turning this into something ugly." She replied, "It already was." That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying every moment in my head. The bar, the photos, the look on his face when he said, "I don't recognize you." I told myself he'd gone too far, that this wasn't fair. But under all that noise, something quieter crept in, a question I didn't want to face. What if he wasn't the one making it ugly? When the sun came up, I sat by the window and saw my reflection in the glass, tired, pale, and smaller somehow. My phone buzzed again. It was a new message from an unknown number. 4 words. "See you in court." The courtroom wasn't what I expected. It wasn't loud or dramatic. It was quiet, sterile, full of people who didn't care about our history. I kept telling myself I would finally get the chance to explain, to make everyone see that this had all spiraled out of control. My lawyer warned me not to get emotional, to answer questions simply, but I couldn't promise that. I needed them to understand that I wasn't a villain, just someone who'd been lonely. Grant sat across the table, calm as ever. He didn't even glance at me when I walked in. I wanted him to look at me, even if it was with anger. Anything was better than indifference. His lawyer began with a quiet voice, reading through a timeline of events. It started months before the bar night, tracing small details I thought no one noticed. Private texts, social posts, little comments I'd made online about being unappreciated. They had everything. They showed a message I'd sent to Ethan weeks earlier. "Watch how jealous he gets if I flirt back." The words glared from the page like a confession. My lawyer whispered, "Stay calm." I said I was joking, that everyone exaggerates in texts. Grant's lawyer asked if I still thought it was funny. I said no, but I could tell he didn't believe me. Then came the photos, the one from the bar, the one from the party, and a series I didn't even know existed. Blurry shots taken by mutual friends, showing me leaning into Ethan, laughing while Grant sat quietly nearby. The lawyer asked if I was aware that the photos were taken. I said no. He said, "But you were aware of the people watching?" I didn't know how to answer that. When they read the transcript of my voicemail, my voice breaking, calling Grant cold, saying he'd made me act this way, I wanted to disappear. The room was silent except for the playback. I said I didn't mean those words. Grant's lawyer said, "But you said them," repeatedly. I tried to explain that I'd been pushed, that I just wanted him to notice me, but my voice cracked halfway through. My lawyer placed a hand on my arm, signaling me to stop talking. Grant's turn came next. He didn't raise his voice or look smug. He just said that he'd tried to fix things quietly, that he'd begged me to stop turning our marriage into a game. He said he wasn't angry anymore, just tired. That word again. It felt like a final door closing. He ended by saying, "I wish her peace. I just can't live like this." I wanted to shout that he was making himself sound noble, that he was rewriting the story to make me look like the villain. But when I looked around, I realized no one needed to rewrite it. It already looked that way. When the deposition ended, I stood frozen, watching him sign the final papers. He thanked the lawyers, shook hands, and left without once meeting my eyes. I followed him into the hallway, my heels echoing on the floor. I said, "Grant, please, can we talk? Just the two of us?" He didn't stop walking. He said, "We've talked enough." Back inside, my lawyer started packing her files. She said quietly, "He's finalizing it today. There's nothing left to contest." I nodded, pretending not to care, but my throat burned. I told her he'd regret it. She looked at me like she wanted to say something kind but couldn't find the words. When I got home, the apartment felt foreign. Too bright, too empty. I poured myself a drink and sat at the table, staring at my phone. No messages, no missed calls. Just a new email notification. It was from the court. Settlement approved. Divorce finalized. I stared at it for a long time, expecting to feel something. Anger, grief, relief. But all I felt was a strange numbness, like my body already knew what my mind refused to accept. The next morning, I heard a soft knock on the door. No one was there, just a small box on the doormat. Inside was a folded note in Grant's handwriting. No need to return what's already broken. I sat on the floor, holding the note, reading it again and again until the letters blurred. It was quiet, the kind of quiet I used to resent. Now it felt like punishment, only this time, it wasn't his silence keeping me awake. It was mine. The days after the divorce passed like static, a constant hum that never stopped, but meant nothing. I woke up, moved around the apartment, and tried to convince myself that I was fine. The silence was sharp at first, then dull, then something worse, familiar. I started noticing how many things in that space belonged to him. The tools he left in a drawer, the jacket he never took back, the mug with the tiny chip he always used. I thought about throwing them out, but I couldn't. They made it feel less empty. My mother still called every morning. She said I should stop feeling guilty, that I hadn't done anything that bad. I told her to stop saying that. She didn't understand. It wasn't about guilt anymore. It was about what I'd become. She went quiet for once, then said, "You used to laugh differently." I didn't ask what she meant. The internet had moved on. My posts were old news, my followers gone. When I tried to post a picture of a sunset with a hopeful caption, no one cared. A few comments appeared. Cold, factual, reminders that people don't forget cruelty just because you get lonely. I deleted it after 10 minutes. I called Ethan one evening, half hoping he'd pick up. He didn't. I sent a short message. "I hope you're okay." No reply. I stared at the screen until the typing bubble flickered for a second, then vanished. That was worse than silence. Sometimes I'd replay the court day in my head. The way Grant's voice stayed steady while mine shook. I used to think his calm meant weakness, that it made him easy to manipulate. Now I saw it for what it was. Distance. He'd already let me go before I realized he was leaving. That thought kept me up at night more than anything. One afternoon, a delivery arrived. No name, just my address written in his careful handwriting. Inside was an envelope and a thin photo album. I opened it slowly. The first page showed our wedding day. Smiling faces, soft light, the moment before everything changed. As I turned the pages, the photos grew fewer, the smiles smaller. The last page was blank except for a note tucked into the sleeve. 4 words. This was the last time. I held the album to my chest and sat on the floor, trying to remember what it felt like to be the person in those pictures. The version of me who hadn't yet turned love into a performance. I wanted to believe she still existed somewhere under all the noise, but I wasn't sure anymore. That night, I poured a glass of wine and sat by the window, the city lights flickering far below. I thought about calling him, just to hear his voice, just to say something simple like, "I'm sorry." But what would it matter now? Sorry didn't erase proof. It didn't undo a court ruling or fix a name already stained. I used to believe attention could replace love, that if people looked at me, I mattered. Now no one was looking, and I'd never felt smaller. When it got late, I opened the window a little. Cool air drifted in, carrying the faint sound of traffic. I whispered into the quiet, "I just wanted you to care." The words hung there for a moment before fading into the noise outside. I looked down at the note again. This was the last time. It wasn't cruel, not even angry. It was final in a way I'd never been brave enough to be. I folded it carefully and put it back in the album, then closed it like closing a door. The next morning, I woke early to sunlight spilling across the floor. I sat on the edge of the bed, listening to the silence. For the first time, it didn't sound like waiting. It sounded like consequence. The echo of every word I'd said, every laugh I'd forced, every look I'd ignored. I used to think silence was his way of punishing me. Now I realized it was the only thing I'd truly earned. Don't forget to hit like, subscribe, and turn on the bell so you don't miss the next story. Write in the comments from which city you are watching.